Okay, sounds great. It sounds like you guys can hear everything, so I'll just start from the beginning. Yeah, I wanted to thank you for inviting me to speak with you guys today. It's really good to see the activity that various groups, GDG groups, are hosting internationally. As I was preparing for this conversation, I was trying to figure out what I could share with you. You know, I was thinking about machine learning topics, operating systems, and the thing that kind of came to my mind is I'm sure a lot of you are getting ready to graduate soon, and you're thinking about your career and where you want to go next, and how to even start your search. So I thought maybe the best advice I can actually share at this point is how to start your career and find your first opportunity. So yeah, a little bit about me. I lead multiple teams working on AI at Google. Prior to Google, I had spent 9 years at Microsoft leading teams on Azure, Xbox, and HoloLens. And before that, I started my career working on operating systems at Apple and Garmin. So I've had multiple transitions in my career, from changing companies, changing tech sectors and products, and transitioning from uh, engineering individual contributor to management roles. And so my hope here is I can share what I've learned along the way too. Yeah, so agenda for today, I'm going to talk about my career journey, what I've learned, as well as share advice on how you can find your first job. Also advice on how and when to change your job when you think it's right. And finally, closing out with advice on early career growth and what you can do at the start of your career. Yeah, to get started, my early days, I actually consider myself lucky. I knew I wanted to be an engineer since I was 12 years old. I always enjoyed computer programming, math, science from a very early age. I didn't necessarily know what kind of engineering I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to work on computers. And the funny story I tell a lot of people is when I was 12, 13 years old, I asked my parents for an Xbox video game console, and my parents didn't let me get one. They didn't give one to me. And so I told myself someday I want to go work on the Xbox video game console so I can have one. Yeah, so outside of that, I did what most people typically do. I went to my local university to study computer and electrical engineering. While I was doing that, I also had some part-time jobs. I would fix computers for students at my local university. Also, the university library system for checking books and laptops out, I worked on that as well. I was a software engineer there. I also worked on, of course, capstone projects my third and fourth year. This is something we do at American universities, kind of one big project that you do your third and fourth year. The top project was, the top image here is a controller for an elevator with just an FPGA, and the image on the right is my fourth year capstone project. It's actually a robot we designed, which uses OpenCV to track your face using computer vision. So the robot will follow you around the room tracking your face, and when you stand still for 5 seconds, it will actually shoot candy into your mouth. So that was my final year project. So yeah, of course, you know, folks in your area in university, as you're approaching graduation, you start thinking about your first job. And so honestly, one of the most important things in finding your first job is finding an internship. So for me, my university sponsored a few companies in a career fair. They would come to our school and interview and recruit. One of those companies was Microsoft. I really wanted to work on Xbox, as I mentioned, since I was 12 years old. I tried that, but I didn't get that interview, and I also didn't get an offer from Microsoft. For Caterpillar, they interviewed me, they gave me an offer. But the thing about Caterpillar was it was a smaller company, and even though I would be working on hardware, which I wanted to at the time, the hiring manager said, we do circuit design for 3 months and testing for 1 year, and that sounded way too slow to me. The other offer I got was from IBM. It was a bigger name back then, still a big name now, and it actually had the highest paying offer. But I really wanted to work on software because it's fast, but I didn't want to let go of my electrical engineering skills. So Garmin had actually offered me an opportunity to work on operating systems where I could write software, but still use my background in electrical engineering to help. And that is where I started my career. It was my first real job. I was lucky enough to have a great mentor, and I got to work on a lot of different areas in the operating system, from counting semaphores to USB drivers. And funny enough, at this point in my internship and in my education, I did not even take the operating system class in my university. So when they asked me to work on counting semaphores, which is an operating system concept, I didn't even know what it was. So I would go home in the evenings to study what counting semaphores were, what multi-threading was, what synchronization was. And that was the first lesson I've had in my career journey, is that after you graduate, you're going to have to learn new things outside of your university. So how do you go find information? How do you learn those skills? That's going to be very important in your career. Yeah, anyways, I had a great time at Garmin, and they ended up extending an offer. This is why internships are important, is they're often your first path to a full-time job. So I had the internship offer, but I had to finish my bachelor's degrees. I had 4 months left, and while I liked Garmin, I wanted to look at other options. I talked to Intel and NVIDIA, but I couldn't line up an offer from them. For Apple, that was actually the company I really wanted to work with at the time. The iPhone had just launched, the first iPhone. I wanted to work on it. I ended up interviewing with them, but I did not land the job. It was very close, but they went with another candidate. And the recruiter told me that, they want me to wait 2 years, build up my experience, and try again. And even though I didn't get these other jobs that I was looking for, I still consider myself lucky, because in 2008, there was a recession in the United States. The economy was bad, not very different than it has been the last 2 years here. And a lot of my friends, their offers were revoked. They didn't have jobs. And so regardless of not getting a dream job, I consider myself lucky that Garmin still had an offer for me to come back. And so I did. I went back to Garmin. Compared to my internship, though, it wasn't as fun when I started. They had me work on a lot of tools and logging and things that I wasn't very interested in, and I didn't feel like it was growing my career. So the second piece of advice I received from my mentor was, when you're not happy with something, speak up. And so he told me, go talk to your manager, just ask them for more opportunities. And I did just that. And I remember my manager and mentor gave me probably one of the biggest pieces of advice that I've ever received, which is, if you want to grow your career, we'll give you opportunities, but say yes to every opportunity we give you. And so that's one thing I want you to remember as I continue this presentation, is say yes to every challenge. And for me, I wanted to prove myself. My manager knew that, and they gave me these opportunities, and I learned a lot. And in the 2 years I was there as a full-time engineer, I got to work on condition variables, drivers, audio, storage, a lot of different areas. Garmin was in aviation, marine, fitness, automotive products, and on all of those products, they only had about 200 engineers. So it was an opportunity for me to learn a lot and do a lot. And you'll see on the right side, these are actually some of those products that I worked on in the time I spent at Garmin. Though, just so folks know, the top image is actually the 2009 Aston Martin. So I worked on the GPS in that car, and that was the car used in the James Bond movie. So that was a proud achievement for me. I got to actually drive that car too. But as I continued my time at Garmin, I started recognizing certain signs. We were working on making a smartphone with a GPS. The reason we were doing this was the first iPhone didn't have GPS, but we knew they were going to add it to the later iPhones. We also knew that they were going to introduce an app store for iOS and iPhones. And so Garmin wanted to make smartphones, but I had been pitching an idea of creating an app for the iPhone, as well as a Bluetooth dongle for older iPhones so they could have GPS. And both of my ideas were rejected by leadership. And I think where I realized I needed to change was those ideas that Garmin rejected, our competitor actually continued with TomTom. So they ended up doing both of those things for Apple. So I realized I needed a change. And as I mentioned, I really wanted to work for Apple. So during this time, I would go to the office and I would come back home in the evenings and try to spend my evening making an iPod shuffle. For folks who don't know, this was one of Apple's original iPod products. It was very simple. It was just an MP3 player. And so I told myself, if I can make an iPod shuffle, then I can prove to Apple that I know what it takes to join the company. Sure enough, I mentioned the recruiter said they would contact me 2 years later, and almost 2 years later on the dot, they reached out again to come in and interview. And so I ended up interviewing. It was actually probably the longest interview experience of my life. It was 10 total rounds of interviews. Back then, it was hire by unanimous decision, and I ended up getting the offer. And I remember when I first joined, and even if you join Apple today, there's this course they have everybody take, which is called What Makes Apple Apple. And what they tell you when you join is they hire you because you are the best in the area you're working on. And what I really enjoyed in my time at Apple is it gave me an opportunity to hone my skills, be really good at what I'm doing, because year after year I would work on iPhones. I think I worked on 5 iPhones and 4 iPads. And when you keep working on newer versions of the same area, you get better and better, and you become a master at your craft. And so I really like that. The other thing is Apple rewarded you based on how many features you would ship. And so you start understanding who do you work really well with, who do you ship good features with. So it was a very rewarding experience for me. I learned a lot. I really became good at what I was doing. And the thing for me is, after that point, what do you do? What do you do after you're an expert in your area? And for me, I wanted to try out management. And I also wanted to ship the first of some new type of product. By the time I joined Apple, the iPhone 4 was coming out. When I was at Garmin, they had been working on GPSs for a while. So I really wanted to be part of something brand new. So I was invited to join Microsoft by several of my former colleagues at Apple, actually. The idea was to build a team and lead a team, work on a product that was the first of its kind. They didn't tell me what it was. They just told me it was not a computer, it wasn't a phone. So I had actually no idea what I would be working on at Microsoft. But what I knew is it would be the first of its kind. I would get to build a team, which is something I was looking to do. And funny enough, it would be a pay cut from what I was working on at Apple. But I knew I wanted to grow my career, and so I joined. And the product that I was working on turned out to be the Hololens, which is one of the first augmented reality platforms that was created. And I got to bring my experience and what I learned from Apple in operating systems and embedded systems. Beyond that, after I shipped the first HoloLens, I was also asked to take on new problems. These were problems with silicon, validation, and a lot of areas I never worked on. I was an operating systems engineer. I never worked on silicon. But I remember what my manager and mentor told me, and the advice I just shared with you is, aim to do more. Never turn down challenges, even if you're not familiar with that area. And one of the things that I resonated with is don't pigeonhole yourself, or don't focus just to say you're an expert on one area. Ultimately, if you want to grow your career, be known for solving any kind of problem and tough problems. So even though I joined Microsoft to work on the HoloLens, I stayed 9 years and I worked on all of these products, which you can see here: multiple Xboxes, HoloLens, and silicon for Azure data centers and cloud. So I had a really great time at Microsoft, and I didn't know the things that I would be making. And I mentioned when I was 12 years old, I wanted to work on the Xbox. 13 years, 14 years later, I got to work on the Xbox. So, if you think long term and what goals you have, you'll eventually get there. But the conclusion and leading to where I'm at today, I really enjoyed my time at Microsoft. I grew a lot of people into managers and directors, but I knew I needed a change. I had been working on low-level software, OSs for a while, and I realized I learned a lot from Garmin, Apple, and Microsoft, and to go somewhere else, I would learn even more. And that's where I was led to Google, where I'm at today. As I mentioned, I'm working on machine learning frameworks. Some of them include Keras, libraries for JAX, as well as Gemini, which is our largest model. I'm also getting to learn a lot more about artificial intelligence and distributed systems, and also how Google works, which is by leadership actually happening from the bottom up. Honestly, most of our ideas at Google come from our engineers, not from our executives and leaders. So that's something I really enjoy seeing and learning from. This is just a sample of a response from Gemini. I asked it a few days ago, what are the best places to eat nearby your university? This is the answer it provided me with. I hope these are good places whenever I visit Korea to go eat. So one thing from all of this is I learned from each of these companies. As I mentioned, at Garmin, I learned the most. It was a small company working on a lot of things. At Apple, I got to hone my skills, be a master of my craft. At Microsoft, I got to learn areas that I never had any experience in before and to try new things. And at Google right now, I'm learning how to work bottom up and really innovate more than I ever have in my career. And the lesson here that I want you to walk away with is, regardless of which company you're at, they're all successful for different reasons. Capitalize on that. Learn why this company is successful. Learn how to be successful in that environment and take advantage of that in growing your career. The other thing I want to share is learning from failure. This is one of my favorite quotes from Michael Jordan, who I consider the best basketball player ever. So you can read the quote, but the part of it that I like the most is in the last sentence. I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. And that really hits me hard because I share similar experiences. I mentioned all of the companies that I've been working at and worked at. And one thing a lot of people do not know is I've never worked at any company the first time I've interviewed it. What I mean here is I've been rejected from all of these companies at least once in my career. Even though I started at Garmin, the first time I interviewed for an internship, they said no. I mentioned at Apple, the first time I interviewed, they said no. I got an offer the second time. Microsoft, I had interviewed 4 times and been rejected 4 different times for internships and full-time offers. It was the 5th time that I interviewed that I actually had an offer and joined. And after I joined, I had 4 promotions in 9 years. And at Google, where I'm at today, I was actually rejected twice before. And the point I have here is you shouldn't necessarily look at these as failures. In fact, if you are rejected from an interview, it actually gives you the exact information you need to know what you have to learn to get that job. After you interview, you know what you've done well, what you need to improve on. And a rejection is just a no for today, not a no for life. And so if you ever are rejected from your dream job or dream company, know that I have never, ever worked at a place that didn't reject me at least once. So keep that in mind. It's not failure, it's learning. So now that I've shared about my career and some advice on that journey, I actually wanted to share advice on finding your first job. I would say one of the most important areas, if not the most important, is developing your profile and your resume. You have to spend a lot of time on your resume. One thing a lot of people don't know is managers and recruiters, myself included, we spend less than 1 minute actually looking at your resume the first time. In fact, there's a study that most recruiters spend 7 seconds looking at a resume before they decide to continue or move on, or to continue reading it or to move to a different candidate. So if they only have 7 seconds, you need to do your best to capture their attention. And you know, you're all in university right now. A lot of you will have similar resumes. You're taking the same courses. You might be working on the same assignments and homework. So try to find out what it is that's going to make you stand out to your peers and also to competitors at different universities. So think about what it is that really makes you stand out. It could be a higher GPA, some professional experience, internships. Maybe you were a teaching assistant or you did research or open source work. But think about those things that actually make you unique and make that a highlight on your resume. The other thing is you can create a custom resume for different employers. And the reason I say that is, you know, a lot of people want to work at a certain company, but I have found what works the best when I interview people or when I've interviewed at places is don't think about the company, instead think about the product that you want to work on. If you really focus on the product and the area, then you know how you can bring your skills to the company, you know what to highlight. So that's a big thing, is look at the posting or the company you want to work for, the product you want to work on, and tailor your resume to show them that you're good for that. The other thing is, I mentioned the resume here, but keep a profile online as well, whether it's a website, a social network like LinkedIn, or something else that might be the prominent job search website, and keep your resume updated. You will work on your resume continually throughout your career, whether it's 30, 40 years, you're going to always have to have a resume. So keep it updated. I spend, you know, maybe an hour every 3 to 6 months just keeping my resume updated, because, you know, that I mentioned, I'm going to share a bunch of advice, but the one constant is you will always need to have a resume or a portfolio or a profile. So spend time on that. The next thing, of course, is once you have your resume ready, you need to find a job and you need to figure out how to find a job. So my biggest advice is leverage the resources available to you, and start with a university career fair. If companies come to your school, that is honestly the single easiest way to find your first job or internship. Of course, if you have classmates or alumni at other companies or friends, reach out to your network. It's okay to take advantage of the connections you've made in your academic and career to find your next job. Also, if there's a position you see on LinkedIn or some social website, it's okay to reach out to the person who posted it, the recruiter or the manager, but you should be very careful about what you do. You know, reach out and share your relevant experience to the job, what you know about that area and product, and why you want to work on that product and what skills you can bring. The thing you don't want to do is just don't ask for a referral for another job because you see one job posted. Don't ask what you can learn to get the job either. To be honest, the job details usually tell you the skills that are required. So don't waste the poster's time asking those questions. And also don't ask for an intro call to discuss the role. Let them reach out to you after you shared what you're good at, why you want to work on the product, and what skills you bring. The other advice I want to share is always search for your opportunity and apply soon. And what I mean is you're not going to find opportunities if you just wait for them to come to you. So go on your job posting website, go on your career fair website, and look for internships and jobs every week, especially at this place in school. In your final 2 years, you should spend every week just looking for an internship or job. And the other thing is, don't wait to apply. If you have 70% of the skills on a job posting, that's usually good enough to say, I can take a shot and try to apply for this position. Below, I'm sharing a statistic that I often share is that for every 32 applications, we'll review 16 resumes. 8 of those will go to a phone screen. 4 will go to on-site interviews. There will be 2 offers, and 1 person will accept the job. So the statistic I shared is for every 32 applications, 1 person gets the job. So what you need to think about is if you were the 200th person to apply, your resume might not even be looked at if you're late. So my opinion is, try not to wait. If you see a job that you're interested in, apply right away. Now, the next part is when you start applying, you'll eventually be called for interviews. You might have heard LeetCode, which is a coding interview website where you can practice different problems. That is a style of interview that we have. And to be honest, LeetCode and system design, whether they're not effective interviews, it is still the norm today. Most places you interview at will have these types of questions. So try to get good at it. Make it an activity or hobby. Find joy in learning and practicing these problems. And so you have to be good at this. And when you're in an interview, remember what I mentioned earlier, share why you want to work on a product, not just at the company. So when you're talking to the interviewer, tell them why you're excited to work on that product, what you want to bring to the product. Focus on what your interests are and ask them how you can do that. And that's the other point I had is, at the end of every interview, they will always ask you what questions you have for them. And you should also interview the company. At some point in your career, 4 or 5 companies are going to want you to join them, and you should be asking the right questions so you know which company is also best for you. Some questions I like to ask is, how do I succeed at this job? What are the mentorship opportunities? That's a really good one to ask when you're first looking for a job. Also ask, if you're interested or if you're really good at a certain area or interested in a certain area, ask them how you can bring that to the role that they're being interviewed for. The other thing is most interviews have a professional or interpersonal skills round where you're asked, what are your strengths? What mistakes have you made in the past and how do you learn from them? Practice these questions. Think about actual stories that you've encountered in the past and learned from, because you will be asked these questions and you don't want to sound fake. You should have real answers and you should have real stories to share. That's what I've found really works the best. And this is one advice that I've never really shared with other people before, but actually the most important question to practice is somebody will ask you to tell you, they'll ask you to tell you about themselves, or for you to tell your story or introduce yourself. So tell me about yourself is actually the most important question to practice, because you have 45 seconds to capture their interest. I recommend always starting with the most recent experience or learnings and be very crisp. Fit that answer into 45 seconds and make sure that they get interested. In fact, the story I'll share is the worst I've seen is I've asked this question to somebody and they spent 12 minutes giving me their answer. That's a 45-minute interview where they spent the first 12 minutes introducing themselves. So practice this question, keep it short, keep it to 45 seconds, and really figure out the best way to tell everybody who you are and what you're good at crisply. Now, at the end of the day, you're going to have decisions to make when you have the job offers. The things that I recommend to ask yourself is, what is your 3-year goal or 5-year goal? Will this job lead you to that goal? There's going to be conversations about how much you're paid and compensation. And what I recommend, this is the lesson and advice I've followed, is ask yourself, would you rather make more money today or a lot more money in 3 years? Focus on career growth, not on pay today. That's one thing that I've found has benefited my career in the long run, is if you care about getting better at what you do and better at your job, the success will follow. The other thing to ask yourself is, the people who interviewed you, do you like them? Because you're going to spend 40 to 50 hours every week working with them and solving problems with them. So you have to like the people that interviewed you. You have to like the team you're working with. And at the end of the day, you may not get the job you wanted. I shared the same case for me. I wanted to work at Apple first, but I ended up at Garmin. So ask yourself, can you still get the best of it? Can you still learn from that opportunity, even if it's not the one you wanted? Now, after you have the job and accept the job, I have some final advice on early career growth. And I mentioned this earlier, be known for solving tough problems, not just specific problems, but very tough problems. Take on challenges. When you're given an opportunity, say yes. Don't say no because you don't know an area, or don't say no because you think it's beneath you and you're better than that problem. If you're not familiar with the area, say that you're not familiar, but you're going to learn how to solve it. And I think that will help your career in the long run, is just saying yes to more opportunities and problems. The other thing is, find appropriate mentors. I have really grown in my career because I've had fantastic mentors at Apple and Garmin and other places. And the advice I have here is, don't just seek a random person and say, be my mentor. I've seen junior engineers go to a VP, vice president, and say, can you be my mentor? And they actually usually don't get advice from those people. And if they do, it's not valuable. So you should seek mentors who are slightly more experienced than you, because they have the most recent knowledge of how they grew their career and what advice to give you. So focus on mentors who are just more senior than you, but not that further along in their career. And the thing I will recommend is, if you ask somebody to be your mentor, they don't know where to start. Instead, think about who you want to work with, who you want to be like, and ask them how you can help them. Everybody is receptive to receiving help. And if you decide to help a mentor, they will give you opportunities, challenges, and advice on where to grow and what you can do better. The other thing is, you have to grow your career. Promotions are a huge part of that. But instead of saying, I want to be promoted to senior engineer, promote me to senior engineer, focus on the long-term skills. Ask your manager and leaders, what skills do you need to develop? What can you do better? Seek that feedback, because if you do that, the promotions will follow. Even though I say that, know what you're worth. Take on challenges, demonstrate success, ask for more challenges, ask for growth. That is important. You are in charge of your career. Don't wait for your manager to tell you what to do. Ask for more. And always be open to learning and receiving feedback. I shared that earlier. Don't be defensive. If somebody gives you feedback, listen, be receptive, take that advice. And the reason I say that is, in my experience giving advice to people, is if they are receptive to my advice, I will give them more advice. If they're defensive, I might stop giving them advice in the future. So be open, take feedback, learn from it. It's a gift. Honestly, this is the biggest piece of advice I want to share today. This is something I wish I told myself 16 years ago when I started my career, is you might decide to do more work than is expected. You know, your job might require you to do something over 40 hours, and you say, okay, I'm going to spend 50 hours. I'm going to spend 10 extra hours working. What you do with those extra hours is very important. If you do more work, it actually doesn't help in the long run. If you spend 8 extra hours a week doing the same thing, it's not going to grow your career. So the best advice I have is take that extra time every week and ask yourself, if I had to do this job again next week, how do I get better? If it took me 40 hours this week, how can I do it in 32 hours next week? How do I do it in 20 hours a month from now? Ask that constant question. How do I get better at this? How do I get faster at doing this? Because the more you do that, the more time you give yourself to find new opportunities and to work on new opportunities. Senior engineers, they don't drop previous work. They just add more to their plate. They take on more, and they do that because they're efficient at time management. So ask that question. If I have 8 extra hours in a day, what can I do so that next week around, my regular job takes me less time? Or study new things. So don't just work extra, learn new things, or try to figure out how to do your job better. My final advice here too is when to seek a different job. So this will be later in your career, but it's important because the time will come. You'll either outgrow your role, or you might want to work on new areas. So it's okay to look for new challenges. I've done that. But my biggest advice here when switching jobs is don't just switch jobs for the sake of it. Don't switch fast. Everywhere you go, try to show that you've done something successfully at that company. You'll see some people switch jobs every year or two, and then over time, their career doesn't advance. So you don't have to spend all your career at one job, but wherever you're at, try to at least get one thing done. Show that you've done something successful for that company. And whenever you're invited to bring your expertise, capitalize on it. If people want you because you're good at something, you will do really well there. And the last piece of advice here too is you might also find that in time you like to work with certain people, leaders, or friends. That's okay, because the longer you are in your career, you'll find that if you're happy at the place you work, you can do more, and it's okay to make your decision about where to be based on where your friends are or where the leaders are that you want to work with. So I know I covered a lot from my experience to my advice. I hope that's helpful, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have. I can't hear the room, so yeah, happy to take any questions. I can hear you guys now.
질문해 주시면 될 것 같아. I think one student have questions, so wait a minute, please.
Yeah.
What was your 3-year and 5-year goals when you first joined the company?
Great question. So when I would say for my very first job, my first internship, I told myself that I wanted to be really good at one specific thing because, in my university, there was a lot of students, everybody was good at different things. And I told myself, try to be the best in one specific area. And for me, I really wanted to be good at either storage or bootloaders and operating systems. And so that was one goal of mine, is be the best in one specific area. And the second thing is I wanted to work on the iPhone, actually. That was my first goal when I was in university. So that was my 3-year goal. My 5-year goal, my 3-year goal was to be the best in one area of operating systems, and my 5-year goal was to get to Apple. So they were very specific goals I had at the time. That's what led me to study more about operating systems, to try to make my own iPod Shuffle. So that was my absolute first area. And I think that's a good one to think about, is as you start developing your career, what do you want to be known for? Think about what you want to be the best at. And maybe also think about the product you want to work on eventually. Those are probably two that I would also recommend to others. Great question, by the way.
I also have another question. First of all, I really appreciate your presentation. Actually, my goal is just work for any company. I want to earn myself without my family support. But I want to ask about, actually, I want to support for any company, but my friends and another people told me you'd better wait and looking for the better job or having a good vision company. So I want to ask about, it will be okay for the first year job? Would it be, even though it doesn't have a wonderful vision?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'll give you mixed advice here. Your friends are partially right in that you shouldn't settle for any job. You should have places in mind, don't rush, don't take the first job that's offered, interview at different companies. So that's where I will say, you might not get all of the information you want if you just take the first job. So make sure you talk to different companies, you interview at different companies, and you might start understanding, this is what I like, these are the people I like, this is the product I like. So interview with companies, but don't hold out too long. For example, if you didn't get 1 or 2 offers from the places you wanted to go, or don't have that, there's always something you can learn from any job. And so you have to find that balance, give yourself time to understand what you really like and the places you want to work. But if that's not coming to you, take any job, because that will also help you learn and advance and grow. So don't wait too long, is what I will say. But I guess one piece of advice too is, the more you find that you're interested in an area, the more you quickly understand, this is what I want to do, the better you're going to be at that area. So that's also going to help your career growth in the long run. Yeah.
또 질문 있는 사람 있나요? Then I also have a question. Have you ever experienced mentally challenging periods such as burnout, and while building your career? If so, I'm curious to know how you overcame them.
Yeah, that's actually a great question, and I should have probably presented about that a little bit more in my slides. Yeah, I have experienced burnout. I mentioned early on to not say, never say no to challenges, but that's not the complete truth. You have to say no when you don't have the capacity to do more. You don't say no because you're not interested in the area or you don't think you can do it. Say no if you don't think you have the time to do it, if you're too busy. And burnout is important because you will hear this, that your career is a marathon and not a sprint. And the reason watching out for burnout is important is you're not always going to get a growth opportunity available to you tomorrow. You might say, I want to take on a new challenge that will let me work at Apple or at Samsung, and I want that challenge today, and it might not be available. You know, there's not hundreds of opportunities available all the time. And when opportunities actually come, which they will eventually, you have to be energized and ready to work on it. You cannot be tired. And so the advice I'm going to give you here is, if you're inspired to grow your career and you're energetic, continue, spend the time. Don't force yourself to grow your career. Don't force yourself to spend time and say, I have to get this level at this age or get to be a manager at this age. Avoid those questions. Instead, focus on areas that interest you. Focus on spending the time on problems you can solve and the opportunities that are available. And if they're not, recharge, be energized, so that when the opportunities come, you can spend the extra hours. So the advice I've given new hires on my team actually is try not to work overtime. Try not to work 50 or 60 hours a week because you want to, because one day the right opportunity will come to you and you will have to spend 50, 60, 70 hours and you should be recharged and ready for it. So don't force it. And the other thing I will say in that is be patient. You're not going to be able to grow your career every single day, every single month, every single year. There will be periods where it's slow and periods where you're going to grow a lot. So it's a marathon, be patient.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
또 질문 있는 사람 있나요?
I'm interested in computer vision, and I got the opportunity to interview a worker in the field of computer vision during this vacation. Can you recommend any question that will help me grow my career and understand their field?
That's a great, yeah. So I actually have people on my team who work on computer vision models as well. And I think the area is shifting rapidly right now. You know, AI is growing more than it ever has in the past. So questions that I would like to ask an AI expert or a CV expert is, with generative AI being a bigger thing, what are some of the applications of computer vision they see coming in? You know, there's been image segmentation, that's been a popular topic. There's also been generative image or generative media that's been coming out, like video that's generated and images that have been generated. Gemini does that, for example, for images. Sora is doing that for videos. So I think it would be good to ask them where they see these things advancing next. And also, the other thing with computer vision is, and especially with Gen AI and computer vision, is it can be compute intensive, meaning you need a lot of GPU, you need a lot of compute resources. So I would also be curious for them to share what is the limiting factor for them advancing computer vision today. So those are probably two questions that I would ask if I was in a room with a computer vision expert.
Then an online participant has submitted a question via chat. The question is, what triggered you to apply the same company like 4 times, even the repeated failures? Where did you get the passion? Could you provide an answer to this question?
Yeah, you know, I think one thing to give clarification is I didn't apply to the same companies month after month. As an example, for Microsoft, I first interviewed in 2006. Then 2008, I interviewed twice. And then I didn't re-interview again for 5 years until 2013. And I think a big portion for me is the first time I interviewed, I actually did want to work on the Xbox. That was one of my childhood goals, is to work on the Xbox. And after those rejections, I decided to pivot my career, go work on operating systems and phones. But when I wanted to get into management, Microsoft was the one that gave me the opportunity first, so I interviewed there. And so to answer your question, it's because I wanted to either work on the specific product at that company, like for Microsoft it was Xbox, and when that didn't pan out, I wanted to learn how to be a manager at that company. So that's the biggest thing, is companies, they're going to work on different products, your career is going to change. But for me, it was about the experience that I could gain or the product that I could work on. And if I'm rejected today, it doesn't mean I can't do it tomorrow. That is one of the best parts about your career is, you know, compared to school, if you fail a class, it gets harder. But in your career and your actual life, you're going to constantly be rejected. And that doesn't mean you can't do it again tomorrow, or you can't try again tomorrow. So that's why I've tried and why I've applied to jobs again. And also because I know myself, if I don't get a job today, in 3 years, I'm going to be better than where I was today. So maybe I'll be happy at that point working at that company.
또 질문 있는 사람 있나요? Then I think the question session is finished. So also, an online participant has submitted the question via chat.
Yeah, I can take one more question if I can answer it quickly, if that's helpful.
Okay, you can answer to this question.
Yes, let me see. Hello, I'm a student listening to. I am a student starting to make my profile through GitHub. What do you think is the part that made your profile stand out to companies? Yeah, so share what you learned. Show that you're contributing and what you learned. That's how you can stand out. So before GitHub, I was actually working on the iPod Shuffle. That was my project at home to try to make that. And I shared everything I was doing and learning on my website and my blog, so people could see that I really cared about growing and learning. And the best way to show that you've mastered an area is to try to teach others. So that's what I'll say, is if you're working on a GitHub project, share more about it in some website or some page about why you're doing it, what you learned, and try to help others learn too that way. So that's my recommendation for your GitHub page. Also, just show that you're actively contributing to code regularly in different projects. Yeah. Cool. I think that's probably all the time I also have for questions. Thank you guys for inviting me to join you and share with you today.